All right. Can I lift this up a little bit? There we go. All right. I was just thinking to myself before stream that this Blender plugin that we've been working on is kind of like the reason I started to write Rust. Hey, from Sweden. Hey, Anders. How's it going? You know, I've been to Sweden exactly once, but it was fun. I lose a terminal on the screen. Where did I put that terminal? There it is. That's what I get for not using Zalige. Just losing terminals all over the place. So this is my testing terminal. Currently, tests are passing. Not that that means much in this project. This is where we've been building the extension. And this should be a running Bevy app, except I don't know where I started this Bevy app from. Oh, there it is. It's over here. So really, I've got 4 terminals here for no real reason. I think the Bevy app's been running for 4 days. Not too shabby. Looking forward to another great Saturday code along. What time of year did you visit Sweden? Christmas. Yeah, I was in Sweden for Christmas one year. Why? I couldn't tell you. I don't have a reason, really. There was that whatchamacallit. It's like a hot semi-alcoholic drink that y'all have out there. It's like the equivalent of like a hot chocolate, but it's not. But it was really nice. Glug. Yes. I have no idea how to pronounce that name, but that was wonderful. It was wonderful to be like in really cold weather drinking that. I've never heard of that one. But yeah, it was great. Walked around. I think I visited a zoo at one point. Okay, so this Bevy app is just gonna sit there forever and live. It doesn't show anything, it doesn't do anything. The only thing that Bevy app does is provide types for the Blender extension via a Bevy remote protocol call. So right now in the Blender extension, we basically have a bunch of stuff working. Where's my interface scale? There we go. So this is the extension as it exists in like the add-ons pane. It doesn't have any settings in here. If we go to export, we have an export extension here on the bottom right. No settings here, but we can turn it on and off, which is great because that means we can kind of hold our data however we want in our blend file and stuff, which gives us a lot more flexibility. So we've got an export extension that basically takes those GLTF extras that we're storing on these objects and converts them into like what Bevy would want to reflect and insert on components. We've got the ability to kind of select from a whole bunch of different components and whatnot, and then insert them. And then this becomes a list of all the components that are on any given object. We are able to build out different kinds of forms and stuff. So like I can set this to red. It works for, I guess, marker components, structs with fields, and I think single element tuple structs. Something like that. It doesn't necessarily have support for everything else. The thing that I was trying to work on is like a generalized version of recursing down through those structures. So that's what this message is right here in the UI. I turn this AC on. So you can see we're on team member. I've chosen like the component tests module team member. This is one of the interesting things too from a usability perspective in the future. If I move this file or I move this component from file to file, in this case, component test is just the name of the like cargo example that's running. Then that full path changes, and Bevy's reflection infrastructure uses the full path to do the reflection. So if you move a component, that is effectively a breaking API change, which is really interesting. So we'll have to build like a tool or two to be able to do like renames and stuff. But yeah, anyway, we're still trying to do like recursive. So this team is just an enum on the team member struct. And then there's another field here called player, which on the left-hand side, you can see here is what I'm currently working on. And player is like another struct below that. So between like nested structs and nested lists, I'm not entirely sure how we're going to handle that appropriately. But that, yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. What made you want to code in Rust in the first place? You were saying, so what I was saying at the beginning of the stream is kind of the kind of coding that I have to do for the Blender plugin, right? Which is Python. And I want to be clear, this is like nothing against Python. I don't have anything against any particular language or whatever. This is just like my experience with writing dynamic languages. I've gotten more than a decade of writing JavaScript and such. You don't have to delete your messages either. Yeah, so you like, I've written JavaScript for decades at this point. I don't really write Python, but the way that errors are handled, the way that it tends to be documented, like, so let's open this again. Is that the right thing? No. Python Blender docs. There we go. So one of these things is a pointer property, right? And if I go to the docs and I say, okay, pointer property, this is everything that I know about pointer properties. So there are two methods that return struct subclasses and I guess types. This is like basically a pointer to a property group or a pointer to something, I guess. It's not actually a pointer, but it's like like a level of indirection to something else, which is like generically meaning a pointer. They've got this whole like RNA thing. They've got another thing called DNA. I think DNA is the C side of things and RNA is the Python side of things at this point, if I understand correctly. But if I'm being honest, looking at this documentation, I have no idea how to use this. Right? There are very few code examples in that respect in the docs. There's a lot of, I guess half the things that I look up, people are kind of like, oh, this is an old way of doing that, which is fine. But there's no clear indication of like what is old and what is new and what I should be using. So what I was saying at the beginning of the stream isn't necessarily that this is bad or anything, but it's a lot of trial and error in the sense of write a little bit of code, check to see if it fails, write a little bit of code, check to see if it fails, and not really knowing if you're going in the right direction or not. So for example, let's say this Python file is like probably going to hit 1,000 lines of code before this add-on is like fully done. And by comparison, like the Rust piece of that is the whole file is like 400 lines of code, but everything from here up to here is tests. So that's half the file. And then this is 20 lines of comment. And then here's the function that does the actual work, which is 100 lines of code. But if you look at the code, it's like error handling. It's all error handling. It's all like make people aware what is actually going on, so that they can actually figure out how to do something, because they're not going to know how this crate works. They're not going to know how Python works. They're not going to know anything about the internals. So it's like make it as verbose as possible in the sense of trying to help somebody. But all of this code, for example, could be replaced by a single question mark. So when I make changes to the Rust side of this stuff, I know what the types are. I know what functions I have available. The documentation has quite a bit. It gives me like input types, output types. All of the examples are scraped from things in the docs. So like if I go to Bevy and I just like, I don't know, query probably has something, but there's like there's built-in documentation tooling for how Rust works in general, which means that you get people who actually write a lot of docs. Like this entire page is just like a giant README dedicated to query. And then in the docs, there's also more tooling where it's like, oh, query is used here and here and here and here and here, inside of the code base, etc. So it's like, I don't want to call it easy because plenty of people have trouble still, but there's a lot of resource to go off of if I want to learn how to use whatever this is. Compare that to the, like Python docs. Where were we? Which page were we on? This one. This is like, here's a pointer property. And it's like, okay, there's a couple of base classes, bpystruct and property. But if you click on bpystruct, this is a built-in base class, but it gives you a note that like this is actually doesn't exist. So like, good luck. You can't make anything a bpystruct. It's only here for documentation purposes. And like, I get that some of that is like, hey, we're using Python as a scripting language on top of something else, and that makes it tough, but yeah, anyway. Like there's this ID properties UI function with a key, right? It gives you something with a property, gives you like an ID property UI manager, but like, if I search for this, it doesn't even show up in the docs. Right? This doesn't exist. And there's a couple of different things like this that show up in error messages. Like there's a property deferred that I've tried to search in the docs. That doesn't exist either, but it shows up in like half of the error messages that I use. So like, I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on anything, but like, it's very tough to figure out what this means when I can't even look up whatever that means. Right? Type error, property deferred object does not support item assignment. How do I fix this? It's just kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start like trying different things. But there's no like approach that I can use to be like, yes, this is going to give me a solution. It's just going to be in here going, does this function give me what I need? Does that function give me what I need? Does this function give me what I need? And then you end up like multi-functions down the line, figuring out that it doesn't work for some reason. So that's kind of what I mean. I have a significantly better developing experience, a significantly better maintainer's experience. I feel like I can write tests and documentation for myself as well as other people so that people can actually learn how to use the things that I build, so that I can share the knowledge that I gain from actually writing something. Testing is built in, documentation is built in. We went over like documentation examples. It scrapes all of the code and shows that in the documentation, et cetera, et cetera. So like that's really why I write Rust these days. I started writing Rust originally just because I was interested in it. I don't want to say I'm a language nerd because I don't build languages or anything, and I'm not like into the research side of things, I guess. But I like using a bunch of different languages. So Rust was on the list at one point, I don't know, 2017, 2018, something like that. And I started using it. And I decided that I liked a lot of the things about it. But yeah, so we end up with this like, yeah, we're kind of like fiddling our way through it. And it's a lot of fiddling our way through it too. It's like, it's been 2 weeks. I've written 800 lines of Python. And there are things in here that just like are not really that, I guess, intuitive. Like they're not things I would consider trivial. Like this whole thing where we're dynamically constructing property group classes based on a base class, setting the annotations to figure out which fields are supposed to be here. Like this feels non-trivial. And then you stack that on top of like Blender has certain restrictions as far as I can tell. Like it doesn't deal with tree data very well. That goes back to that pointer property thing, right? So we've got all of these types that define all the property groups. We have all of the classes, right? There is no way, as far as I can tell, to set up a UI for a like a tree structure or like a set of dicts or something like that. In fact, there is no support for the dict type. They built out an entirely like side-by-side version of data types. So you can't actually use the Python types. You can't use list and dict and all those things. You have to use property groups and property float and property whatever. So there's this like whole secondary version of everything. So even if you knew how to do things in Python, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And then on top of that, there's 2 ways to do it past that too. So like you can do property groups and stuff. And that lets you build UI from it. And you can also, on an arbitrary field, sometimes set arbitrary data, but then you can't build UI from it because it's not a property. So you end up having to do a lot of like this weird bookkeeping where we're basically like trying to construct a bunch of these property groups. But nested property groups don't work that well. Which is one of the things that I'm dealing with the recursion right now. So like we've got, where's component tests here, right? This has, where's team member? Team members here, right? So let's look at player first. Player is fine, player works. If we insert a player, we get a form that has the string, the F32 and the I32, right? This kind of like single level, one set of fields, primitive type values works just fine. Once you start getting into like this player is a player inside of this team member. So this field is now a struct, which becomes a property group. This property group is now like disconnected completely from this first layer. So like, what do you do with that second layer? And there's no really good answer inside of Blender as far as I can tell. And actually one of the issues that we're seeing here, this type error, because I've run into it so much, we are, let's go into this, let's do active editor. So in here, this is our update component form function. This is basically saying, okay, you've selected a new component. We need to build the form out of the property groups that we've built so that we can build a UI from it later. So the first thing we do is set a pointer property to the property group that we built up for that type. This is pretty straightforward, but because we've set active editor to this pointer property, and because that player type is a class and not a primitive, what we end up with is if we try to set the player key here, this player key doesn't exist, first of all. If you try to do like if key in active editor, you get an attribute error. So you can like get a throw basically, as far as I can tell. And if we try to set it like this, so like active editor key equals like a pointer property to that next type path or whatever, we end up with property deferred object does not support item assignment. So yeah, one of the things here that I think that I might try to do is this is bpy.types right now. I think this should be or could be context.window manager. That's the other thing. Like if you want to search for the type for something, that's at one path. If you want to use like the value of something, that's at a completely different path. Let's make sure that this works. Which is overall just kind of like, it's this. It's exactly what this is. It's do this, go build the extension again, go into the extensions, like drag this back in, reinstall it. Because it doesn't fully clean up, we have to actually close it out if we want everything to work cleanly. Run Blender again. Our add-on has now loaded and started up. We run our operator to fetch the type registry. We get in here, we try to do team member, I guess. We insert this, and now this is having issues. Window manager object doesn't have that attribute on it, so we can't actually set that, I guess. That's another thing, actually. I don't even think that's our issue. I think that's a different issue. Because dot access and bracket access are two different things in Python and have two different sets of behavior. So in this case, we get to 167. We try to set active editor to this thing, and the window manager object doesn't have that attribute on it. So we can't set that, I guess. So this has to be that types thing. We set it as a pointer property to this other thing. This pointer property, we can't set a key on. So like at some point here, like where do we go? We can't get access to the thing that we want to do. We can't set the key. What type is window manager? Window manager is just like a built-in window manager. Let's see if I can click it. Can't click it. That's built in. bpy.types .window manager. Hopefully will show up in the docs. This. That did not send me to... Why did that send me to popover? It's this, though. So basically, we can put fields on this type, but if we do it via the property way of doing things with that types thing, then we can't add the fields that we need to add. If we do, yeah, anyway. It's a lot of this. Right. And attribute error down here, window manager object has no attribute active editor. That's on 696. So if we look on 696 after setting it to context.windowManager, this now fails because square bracket access is different than this. This is effectively dot access in function form. So it's like, I feel like there's 5 different ways to do everything and none of them are compatible at this point. The other idea that I had, which would make building the UI in Blender and such much easier for certain cases of things, is flattening. So Pandas luckily has documentation. Pandas can give us a normalized version of JSON. So how do I describe this? This is potentially not going to do what we need it to do. But if we look at this, right? So we've got a list of objects. These objects have key names. These key names sometimes have lists inside of them. Sometimes they have objects inside of them, etc. Right? So we've got keys and values, JSON form. Straightforward. If we use pandas JSON normalize, and we can pass in the correct arguments, which is basically all of the key names, and they can be nested too. So like there's counties here, which is a top level key. State and short name are also top level keys, I guess. I don't know why they're in a list there. Maybe counties is the ID. I don't know. I don't really understand what counties is there. But we can do state, short name, which are both top level keys, and info, governor, which are nested keys, right? So we've got this list of top level keys, and then if we need to dig into them, we've got a list of the key path down in. And that gives us effectively a flattened table with all of those key names and all of those values. So theoretically, if we can do something like this, then we can store everything as one flat like form, and Blender will work perfectly fine with that flat form. And we don't need to do any of this recursive stuff, and we can kind of stop mucking with property groups and stuff. Not sure if you missed it. What does this Blender add-on do compared to Bevy? The answer that the thing that everybody is going to ask me about this if I ever show it to anybody else. Let's see, where's Bevy's? So Bevy has a lot more stuff to it, right? They have this concept of blueprints, a concept of levels, a concept of like a library scene, or like not a library scene, but like a library, I guess it is library scene, like a library scene, and then like blueprints, and then those blueprints are like collections, and then you have levels, and those levels can use those blueprints, and they implement their own loader and stuff like that, right? Prefabs basically, yeah, a version of them. I'm intentionally not using the word prefab because there's a Bevy PR open for an example for prefabs currently, and I don't want the nomenclature crossover because the prefabs in Bevy's PR for the example uses entity disabling and stuff like that. So I just want to be clear that I'm talking about Bevy's blueprints, but prefabs is not a bad way to try to understand that. I just want to be specific because I know that this will cross over at some point. So there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a custom GLTF loader. They do, so it like loads things at different times than you might expect in a regular Bevy app. You don't really have control over the loading, but it does that more higher level like functionality and whatnot. This is much more minimalistic. So the way that this one works is obviously they're both Bevy plugins, but you add the plugin, you register your types, and this will expose that stuff via BRP, so the Bevy remote protocol. That registry information, if I am selected inside of, yeah, so there's an operator in here that will just let you fetch the Bevy type registry information. You can go in here, select any component, insert it onto this object, and then down here is a form to modify the values for that component. So far, pretty much the same in the sense of like Blenvy's UI is in this side menu. We could put it in the side menu. It doesn't really matter. Relatively the same in sort of like insert components on stuff, right? The big difference for us is that we do everything on GLTF exports. So what we actually end up with, do I have an example of that just to show? Yeah, so what we end up with is actually this, exactly. So in this example, we've got this Scheme GLTF extra property, and it's got a component where the key name is the full path to the component, and the value is the values of that component. And this is the way that Bevy's reflection wants that. So there is no prefab system, blueprints, custom GLTF loading, anything like that. It literally just comes in like this. And then we have a scene post-process observer, so scene instance ready. And that takes the reflection data stored in the GLTF extras and instantiates it. So what that means is that everything works the way you would expect it to work inside of Bevy, from GLTF loading to the GLTF extras to et cetera, et cetera. So more similar to working with scene.ron files. You know, I've intentionally avoided working with scene.ron files. Let me see what the current state of those is in the examples. We are all waiting for BSN though, is kind of what I will say to that extent. Where's the scenes folder? Scene, I guess it's in assets, isn't it? What is the... Scenes load scene example.ron. Assets, scenes, load scene example. So this is Bevy's, I guess, old scene format. I guess we don't really have the new one, but yeah, scene.ron file with resources, entities, and whatnot. We don't currently have a concept of entities or anything like that. We are piggybacking on GLTF. This is literally a GLTF file. So when it comes to these entities, we don't have an answer for that at the moment. But in the same sense that this is the exact same reflection infrastructure. So this transform, we're currently using JSON. This is using RON, but the serialization is the same. Full path to the component, value of component, and all of these components then get pulled together and inserted onto that entity, right? Yeah, no problem. I really like so the goals for this are, I wanted to understand this stuff better. because I like using Blenvy, but I don't understand the internals as well as I would want to. Given that Blenvy is kind of on a hiatus right now, I thought it was a good time to dive in and try to work with it. So now I understand significantly more about all the reflection infrastructure, and hopefully some other people do too from watching the streams and stuff. But I understand more about the reflection infrastructure and the choices that are being made. This is significantly more minimalistic than Blenvy, in the sense that it like really tries to be something that is maintainable or forkable, right? On the Rust side, this is effectively one function that instantiates from the reflection information. So all of the complexity for this entire project is in this Python. Which is good because theoretically, if, let's say, the Blender side of things changed drastically or went away, or like, you know, I gave up maintaining it for some reason or whatever, right? Not saying I will, but like, you know, open source happens. Then what you end up with is like stuff that you can actually set in custom properties. Like you could write this yourself. It would be painful, right? You don't really want to write this out manually, but you can absolutely, like, it's not going to break your project to go in here, go into custom properties, hit new, and start typing out JSON, you know? So like, it's nice that if for some reason you adopt this and then it goes away, you're not stuck. Like your project isn't dead, right? And it's open source, so you could fork it, you could like keep the UI going or whatever. And it's fairly small, you know, it's like 1,000 lines of Python. It's, you know, effectively 50 lines of Rust or something. And yeah, and theoretically, the other thing that would be really cool, although I haven't done any testing with this yet, is if this is standardized the same way that like Bevy's scene data is standardized and it's just the reflection data, then you can actually write this from anywhere. Right? So anything you wanted to do with any custom editor, any third-party 3D software, any other program that had add-ons, as long as it all like doesn't delete other things, you know, as long as it doesn't like, hey, I'm going to delete, rotate, and insert my own other component, you could have it all work together in that way. And then the Rust side of things works. Like it just works as long as you stick to the, you know, Bevy format of reflection. But yeah, Halo, how's it going? It's talking about Blender and stuff. So, all that said, is that I just spent 40 minutes talking about Bevy and Rust and Python and stuff. All of that to say, basically, like, we might want to just flatten this stuff out if we can't figure out the recursive approach. Hey, Xavier, how's it going? Mowing the lawn, mowing the Brazilian jungle. Great warm-up. So, yeah, I mean, we're basically in a place where like all of the top level stuff works. And I don't know how we're going to set this key to build out more form. So what this might turn into, actually, now that I think about it, maybe we could build a dynamic property group here. No, I don't think that'll work. I'm trying to, maybe if we do a list of active editors and we flatten at this point so that what we end up with is more or less a flattened group. I'm concerned about the way that lists work in that flattened world, though. I also have like, I do think that at some point this becomes edge casey, because why are you setting a list 3 or 4 levels deep, you know? I would like to just support any generic component that you can write. But that does mean arbitrarily recursing down. So I think if we flatten, then we end up with like lists of stuff at some level. And like theoretically, you could have a list of objects that have lists, and that would get really hairy. So my current suggestion is don't do that. But yeah, I'll have to check. I'll have to check to see if Blenvy supports some of these pathological cases, and if they do, how they do that. The other thing that I really need to figure out at some point is I'm actually kind of concerned that we have to specify property groups if we want it to save data into the blend file. And if we have to do that, then we have to build out another layer of infrastructure to like serialize and deserialize to and from a string. Also, if flattened, you would need different bpi.props.xxxx property. Otherwise, they would all add the same value. Yeah, that's also really weird. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer, unfortunately. If we go the flattened route, that will work for structs for sure, I think, right? Because we can currently do one level. The other thing is that a collection property, as far as I can tell, can't store heterogeneous types. So, like, you can't have a collection property that stores 2 different kinds of types. Which makes it really awkward. Again, no examples on this page, unfortunately. Is this the page with examples? No. Are you making a plugin for Blender for easier Bevy implementation? Yes. Taking the reflection data from BRP. So we're working with 0.16 right now, which is not out. Taking the BRP registry reflection data, building UI in Blender, getting it back into Bevy via GLTF extras, and then using a scene instance ready observer to apply that reflection data as components. Which is great. The whole cycle works. Currently, we're trying to work with, or what I'm trying to figure out currently is the recursive nature of components. I think that a lot of, let me pull up my other project. Let's see, code dot. There we go. That's not gonna work. Let me pull it over here. So here's a random game. Oh, ISPerf has a release now. It's a little late in the 0.15 cycle, but it's nice that they did put one out. So we've got a bunch of components all over the place. Let's take a look at some of them. Materials, camera. So camera rig, F32s and VEC3s, this would work. You could just insert this in the current version of the plugin. We don't have support for default yet. Maybe we should. Do we have any other components here? Components. I wish I had a way to, how do I frame this? I wish I had a way to search for like Bevy projects and analyze what components they've defined. I think there are ways to actually do that on GitHub data, but it's more effort than I'm going to do right now. So we've got a couple of marker components here. Those are all good. This global transform component probably wouldn't be set inside of Blender. So there's that. I guess you could set the global transform, but that's not really what that component is for, particularly. Component, out of bounds behavior. So this is an enum, enums work, marker component. Like, I wonder how many people have more than single level components in their projects. Right, here's an animation offset timer with a timer. You actually can't define timers inside of Blender anyway. So that wouldn't work as far as I'm aware. You would have to have some special required component. Platform animation offset F32 would work. Rotate with an axis that's a vec2 would work. Enum with a struct in it. This is one of the question marks currently. Does it work already and you're just upgrading it, or are you developing it still? It works. I wouldn't like give it to somebody and like tell them to go use it. Like, it's not released, but it works. All of the, like, the GLTF here is exported from that plugin. And this all works. So let's say this event ordering one, for example, it exports like this. And then I have some examples in this. Here's event ordering. We've got the plugin installed. And then, where's this one? All you have to do is spawn in like this. These are actually just for the example. So all you have to do is spawn in with the GLTF, and it will get handled. And then, where's the check? Here's the check. And then this character is being spawned in from that GLTF. So, yeah. Would love to see you making at least some kind of game with it. Well, that's why I'm doing this. This project that I'm going through over here, checking to see what my component values are, Actually, a bunch of these are in Blender currently, not using this plugin, just manually. And it's really painful. The way that you have to do it without the plugin is like something ridiculous like this. Let's see. Long time ago, but I remember, well, you can just do lists of different types as long as they all inherit from something in common. No guarantees. You might be confused. Oh, really? So as long as they have like a base class in common, then a collection property can be anything. Because that would fix my issue, actually. For the most part. Because then what we would have is, I already have the property groups. They all inherit from the same component database class. And then I could build the UI if I can index into that, into each of those. I think that would work. So maybe we should try that at some point. Morning, Ryan. How's it going? Can't you pass a function to a Serday attribute and use for the deserialize? So you could deserialize a float into a timer. Yeah, I mean, there are ways you can deserialize a float into a timer. I don't know if the reflection infrastructure for Bevy currently supports it, or if we would need custom support for it. Right? I think that like timer has a bunch of constructors. So you have to pick one of the constructors to use if you have an F32. And if you have an F32, then you don't know which of the constructors to use. So I think there would have to be a little bit of something there, a little bit of grease to make that work. But yes, you can turn a float into a timer for sure. One super valuable feature would be to render out points and volumes specifically for things like moving platform path or collider sizing. Deserialize with path. Yeah, so I would love to rely on Bevy's reflection information as much as possible. I haven't looked into extending that reflection information just yet. It would be cool if we had like a reflection extras of some kind. I know that Bevy Inspector eGUI has some custom attribute macros to set things like max and min and etc. It would be cool to have like a Blender UI kind of attribute that you could put on things that wouldn't solve the third party components. So if you had something from Avian, you wouldn't be able to put custom UI on top of it. So maybe there's a better solution, but yeah. Render out points and volumes specifically for things like the moving platform path or collider sizing. Points and volumes. You can definitely do that already. I'm trying to think in my head. The very basic version of that is to have like two empties. Put an empty in the start, empty at the end, and then have the platform go from empty to empty. I could easily see that being extended to curves of different kinds. I haven't spent a lot of time examining what curves look like once you export them from Blender to Bevy, but I know that people have done I know people have done curve export into Bevy and then used it. I don't think we would need special support for that. But maybe I'm wrong. We'll get there though. There's like a layer of this that is like the infrastructure has to be really solid, and then we can start thinking about higher level stuff. And I think that that's one of the higher level things. Like, make sure the use cases work. And like defining a path that a platform can go along is one of the use cases, right? But that ideally we would be relying on Blender to define that curve and components applied to the structs or components applied to the objects that you define when they're exported, such that like a platform could be associated with a curve and then you would just run it along that curve. And then we wouldn't need special support for it. You could have that work however you wanted inside of your application. Yeah, so I think this recursive approach is starting to be a little bit painful. Well, more painful than previous work, which makes me think that it's not supposed to be possible. So I'm basically writing the first level of a recursive algorithm here, which is generally speaking how you should write recursive algorithms, right? You write step one and then you just recurse that step. So what this is doing currently is it's checking to see if our property group is a class. If it is, we set the active editor on the window to that class via a pointer property. And this allows us to then, in the UI, introspect this editor to see what fields are there and to render them in the UI. That's why the single level works. And then this next loop is for deeper stuff. So it's possible that when we do this, what we actually need to do is set this like this, but do it as a list. And if we do this as a list, then we can insert the root at the top, and then we can insert all of the keys as additional list objects. And if we do them all in order, we can make it look like it's all in the right order. And then we just need to remember that we've done that and reconstruct the data from a list of stuff. Which, if we've done it in the right order, we should be able to do fairly straightforwardly. We have all the information, I think, to do that. Let's see, what changes do we currently have here? The way we're currently doing it is I'm trying to like, I think the better way to do it would actually be this way, if we could get it to work. So we've got this active editor, which is set to this pointer property, right? So the root property group, which has like, you know, name or whatever. Or like in this case, it has player, which is a player, and then I forget what the other one is. It's an enum. Team, I think it was. The team can be set perfectly fine. The player needs that second editor. So if we look at all of this in terms of, let's see, component fields, properties, etc., right? So if we look at the logs here, just to explain what's going on. Hopefully I haven't scrolled too much and there's a place we can get back to look at this. Okay. So update component form is what sets that active editor. This is the type that we are currently working with. So we're currently working with component tests team manager. We actually need to get back to using the old version of this. So let me make sure that we're saved. I'm using just for like a task runner, but when we build this, we're running Blender headlessly, effectively, to build that extension. The add-on gets installed like this. And then I close Blender out because I want it to always have a clean run. That clean run is super useful for debugging, is why I keep doing that. It's a little bit annoying, but it's way better than debugging something that no longer exists because it was stale data. So here, if we have team member, this is our problematic one currently. We can insert that component. It inserts here, the form unfurls. That's all good. We have a type path of team member. The component fields, we're starting with player. Player has this registry data. And then the player field has this type. Or actually, this is the registry information for the parent. So it probably shouldn't be in here. This is the type of the field. So this is the type of the player field. We can get the class from the Scheme property groups. So we've got component test player. This is a property group. And then we cannot set that to the value on the window that we need to set it to because property deferred doesn't support item assignment, and property deferred isn't actually explained anywhere in the Blender docs. So we're kind of guessing. There's a way to get a clean add-on when making Blender reset, but it requires some Python import, hack magic in the add-on. Yeah, I've got some of that kind of stuff. All the way down here, we've got register and unregister. So here we've got register a bunch of types, set up a bunch of data and stuff, unregister. The reason I'm no longer just pasting this into a script file and running it is because the exporter doesn't work that way. I know we're not working on the exporter right now, but the where's the exporter? So another quirk I will say about working with Python in Blender, the GLTF2 export user extension class name here has to be called this. It cannot be called anything else. This is a value that is hard coded in the Chronos GLTF2 whatchamacallit add-on. So this file has to exist in the place that it looks, which is the add-ons directory. And it has to look for this class and this module specifically. So this has to exist here, and it has to exist in a file that the other add-on can actually go get. That's why we keep installing it. Otherwise, everything else can just run. Property deferred is not meant to be accessed. It is the type, not an instance of it. Yeah. Okay, so maybe after we've set that, we could do this. Well, let's kill this. Reopen. You think this will fix it? That would be really cool if it does. Okay, in update component form, invalid ID property type, property deferred, not supported. Invalid ID property type, property deferred, not supported. So that means I have a type here. Pointer property is not what I need here then? Is that true? Can I not set a property on this dynamic key? I don't know that you were wrong. You it's progress. Can we not set this to a property? That's really what I think this is saying, right? Right? Invalid ID property type property deferred not supported. But that is this, right? So if I set this to 2, and we did our dance again. I should take some time to make sure that this blender window always goes to the right. Yeah, okay, so that works, right? So, adding a type to a list is not supported. It can only be added to some Blender base types. Adding a type to a list is not supported. We don't have a list currently. This should be, so active editor is a pointer property to a property group. And this would be a random key on that pointer property, I guess. Or maybe it goes through and tries to do it on the property group. I really don't have the answer there. If we can set this value to a property of some kind, then our problems are fixed with the recursion. That is it. Okay, so just set the property values. Do not try to change the type of it. What do you mean by that? Just set the property values. Don't try to change the type of it. So the active editor is a pointer property to a property group, right? That property group. Oh, are you saying that I need to set the value of that key to something that is compatible with the property group? Active editor is not a collection property. Active editor is just a pointer property. We haven't moved to the list version yet. See, active editor up here is just a pointer property to a property group right now. Morning, Ines. How's it going? So we've got this active editor, which is that pointer property to the property group. Because this is a pointer property to the property group, we can do .prop on the fields to set the UI. The reason that doesn't work for player is that player is a class. It's another property group. So we need to try to set that because doing this, if we check for player, the player key doesn't exist. Why it doesn't exist, I don't know, because there's no docs. Fine, how's the game going? Game's going all right. Trying to flesh out the Blender plugin a little bit more. The Blender plugin is fully working. It does everything it needs to do. Just trying to shore it up a little bit. Xavier. Oh, okay. And use array indexing to access a struct member by name. Yeah, so dot syntax, like dot whatever. So if we do, because this is some kind of property, right? We can do dot syntax here because we've defined the type property. This is the same, in my understanding, as getAttr this with a string here. But both of those are different than this. Right, so this looks for, I don't know how to say it. It's like dot looks for attributes and square brackets look for something else. I don't know. If yes, you would use getAttr. getAttr will fail. So if I do getAttr with the key, this is what you're talking about, right? Right, this getAttr here, before we set this value. Let's get rid of this. Blender ourselves back up. Back in the blender. If you were scaled down to quarter sized and dropped in a blender, how would you get out? That was how you got hired at Google at some point. Maybe that didn't fail. Why did that not fail? Oh, I think I have. Okay. Sorry. Value. What are we printing here? Let's print is class. The number of times I've dragged this zip file into Blender is high. Okay, so that fetched the data. We're going to grab team member. We're going to insert. And now that throws an issue. It didn't throw an issue before. Object has no attribute player is what happens here. And that's component test team member, which has to have player because we're iterating over it. Right? This is the part that I think really confuses me. The property group here. This is the property group that we're putting on active editor. Here's component fields. We're getting the annotations for that property group. So component fields is the annotations for the property group that we're setting in the pointer property, right? And then when we iterate over this, that means component fields gives us player, but player doesn't exist on this. Let's get rid of getAttr here. It's going to be unfortunate because one day when I make a video about this, I'm going to be like, yeah, I don't know what to say here. Because who knows why this does or doesn't work. Why they went with two different kinds of like object access, I do not know. Yeah, and then key player not found if we access it like that. So neither way, get adder or bracket access, neither of them can find that key in active editor. Right? Which is wild. Because I'm pretty sure if we do the same thing and we look for, what's the other one? Team? Yeah, team. Team will print. Unless I've just totally messed up my understanding and or whatnot, which is also eternally possible. But going back to the beginning of the stream, this is what I meant. Okay, so update component form, team member, in player, we get the type information, we're looking for player, it is a class. This is class green team member, right? So class green team member. So this value is the value of the key, which should be component test player, right? So that's a class. And then we have so we actually have the property group already. That's sweet. And then we have team, which is a field on component team's test member, which is green. And then we have the editor itself, which is component test team member. Now, why does component test team member not have player? Right? I think if I do this, it'll break. Insert. Yeah. So it's definitely there, and it's definitely there in the same way that team is there. But because it's a class, for some reason, it doesn't have a value, and it doesn't exist as a key. So we can fully access the other one, but not this one. And I don't know why. It's really weird that all of these things are called properties, or all of them inherit from property or whatever. And you can't build UI for a property group. Right. So Spool, collection, enum, float. I guess the other thing I could do is make this a pointer property when I define it. Which would mean in make property. So make property is somewhat recursive. So if we have a struct, then we're currently just returning the type that we put here. But I guess we could wrap this in a pointer property at this point. Feel like we would have to know ahead of time. Right, because then basically this knows when we call make property, we pass in a value that tells it whether it's the first iteration or not. And if it's not the first iteration and we're doing a struct, then we have to return pointer property. I assume the OK comma means you're typing something. Savior. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. I don't know if putting a pointer property here would help. We access this in a few places, right? We access this update component data. Where else do we do this? Update component form. Not terribly concerned with update component data right now. And then also in fetch Bevy type registry, which is where we fill it. And then I'm doing the register class outside, so I would need to do the register class inside. Usually in Blender, properties are set as type annotation for static class members, and in the instance of this class to get a non-static member with the same name but not a property deferred. Right, so when I put together a property group, that is supposed to be like a type, so to speak. It's like just a class, but it's supposed to be like a type. But it's not actually. And then that type, when instantiated, I guess doesn't get the property deferred type. I guess they all are technically static, right? We are... I guess I'll try the pointer property approach. Right? So this probably... I don't like putting this in make property because that means testing is going to be harder. But I don't know that I have a choice because make property kind of needs this. So we've got to register it here. And then we could theoretically pointer property this. This kind of stuff would be easier in Lua, JavaScript, or any prototype-based language. In Python, it gets confusing. Yeah. Super confusing. So props, pointer property. So now, whenever we return a struct, we're returning a pointer property. That may mess with us. But I just kind of want to see what it does. Because then where's form? Update component form. I don't know if this check passes anymore. But if it does, then we don't need this. We need this. Because that'll have the pointer property in it. And I'm anticipating this to fail for some reason. But let's see what it does. And I think this is really the reason this takes so long is because now I have a couple of different paths that we could go down, right? We could try to go with the list approach. We could try to go with this approach. We could try to keep going with another approach. But to know if any of those approaches are going to work, I actually have to try them. Okay, so team member is class player, no attribute team. So team is gone. And then our UI is also borked at the moment, but it's fine for the moment. Yeah, so player still not there, but now also team is not there. And I guess the final test is get at her while we're here. Just to make sure. Thunder. Open. Open so that I can close you again. Team member. Insert. And we're ignoring some of the other issues from the UI drawing, which is fine. Yeah. And then component test team member has no attributes. Player. So that doesn't help us. Like creating those properties earlier doesn't help us at all. Let's get rid of all of that. So, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we can set a property on like a dynamic path, right? So this is what I need to do, basically. But for some reason, that key is inaccessible to us. I don't know why that is. I know that it only happens, like that key is only missing for classes, specifically property group classes. Oh, instances of a class get a non-static member with the same name but not a property deferred type. Oh, there's two types with the same name, or there's two classes with the same name where one is like extended from property deferred and the other one isn't. Is that what you're saying there? Can we create our own? I guess we can test pretty easily if it will let us set if it will let us set multiple here. We don't need to use active editor for that. We can just set active editor list. And we set active editor list to collection be pride of props dot collection property type equals component data, maybe. And then this is awkward, I think. Because we need to append and set values for any field that is a primitive, but not fields that are rich, which I guess is good. Sorry, you were on the phone. No stress. No expectations for chat, you know. So theoretically, if we have a collection property and this is component data, which I think is what we derive from, right? Yes, component data. Then this active editor list, which apparently doesn't want to autocomplete. Is it add Yeah, so I think this is the same thing. So we need to add, that gives us a component that we can then set stuff on. And component list is an enum list, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So that's not relevant. So here we have active editor list. And we need to do .add. And this feels weird now. Because right, so we've got form A, and form A has those two component data fields, but we also need it to have the other types that need to be initialized. Collection property doesn't have like some other kind of thing, right? Collection property, of course, doesn't have any documentation. Is add even on here? I don't even think add is on here. Literally does not have .add in the documentation. Is it on prop? No. Is it on struct? No. Where does add come from? This is the mind-boggling part of working with these APIs, because like I know add exists. I know it does. I'm using it. But it is literally undocumented. Collection property is the type. So you're saying I need to look for bpy props? That collection property? Which doesn't tell me anything about it. Also, not sure we need a collection property here. Because we actually just need this, right? And if we have this, then what we can do should I be putting this on types? I think I should be putting this on context dot. And then active editor list dot append, I think is the right thing. This. And then theoretically we would append again later. Here. Let's get rid of these. Let's do this. It's the other thing. White space is totally not my preferred. And then we have the class in value, so it needs to be value. So we just keep appending pointer properties to this And then when we go down to the actual UI, we can introspect those to try to get the data. And then I guess we either have to maintain the order of those indices or label them somehow. In the doc, a subclass, so the multiple types, as long as they inherit from a common subclass, should work. Yeah, but how do you put them in? Right? Like the collection property .add gives you what type? It seems to be an instance of the type that you gave to the collection property, right? So really what we need is .add with one of the other property groups, like an instance of another property group that inherits from the component database class, which I can't find the docs for add. So, which is kind of hilarious because like on some level, reading docs is something that I've spent a lot of time doing. And like figuring out how to write them, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, no, matches no enum in event. Oh, because this needs to go here. Can't drop a file in the wrong spot. Fetch the registry. Team member, insert. And then context window manager, active editor list. Should be the value which we should be able to set to an empty list, right? So why can't we set, oh, because it's dot access. This is my, we have to do it with bracket access. Because why would you have a language that does access in the same way? Why not insert curly braces and have it do a third type of access? Why not have double asterisks? Why not have that be some other kind of access? Let any consumer override any of them. Okay, ID property array. What is an ID property array? And why doesn't it have append? ID property array, I think, is the type of the dynamic fields that we're setting. So it's this. I guess append is not the way that you append to lists in Python. Append, it is append. So why, if I've set that to be a list, can I not append to it? Is the real question. Am I going to need to build this up before I set it? Do the docs have an ID property array? They do. Get pop to dict update values. Where is I guess this is just static data then? F, D, I, or B. Can we only set one of those 4 values in this list? That would be wild. I guess let's do active editors equals this. Active editor list. And then active editor list. And then active editor list. And then why is that a problem? Indent error? Oh, because I have one space in the wrong spot. Cool. And then I gotta match my indentation for this and set it equal to active editor list. So this should tell us whether that's possible or not, at least. But yeah, this is what I do on this plugin behind the scenes too. So it's very much a lot of trial and error. A lot of like, this is undocumented, that is undocumented, et cetera, even though it is a list and that list can append, then you can't set it for some reason because floats, ints, booleans, and dicts are allowed in ID property arrays, but not anything else. So if we use properties, we get a collection group. If we use ID properties, then we get dicts, but either one of those doesn't have the other. We get floats, ints, and bools in both of them. It's just like there's missing stairs all over the place is really what it comes down to. It's like, hey, here's a staircase. Start walking up the staircase. Put your foot down and suddenly your foot is through the floor. Okay, so we can't do this. We can't set a list unless it's a collection group or whatever. Let's back out of this change because we can't do that. So here's my question for the collection property. You have to set the collection property type to component data, but how do I instantiate a property group that base class is component data? Because if we do .add, there are no arguments. And we just get like an object to set stuff on. And collection property in the docs so far has not given me any useful documentation. Is there an add on property group? No. Property group item.collection? No. And then I start doing like Blender, collection property, common base class. Not possible. And this person is actually looking for what I'm looking for, right? Is it possible to store different types with a shared base class in a collection property? No. Blender's API is built on defining exactly what type is in a collection. It's not possible to add other types, even if they're subtypes. The reason for this is that Blender does not store the type of the item with the item. It always uses the class that has been given by the type parameter as the class. Best way to do this is to do the reverse and add a type enum to your property component. Component types array is an argument to this. Where does that come from? So the property component is an enum property where the items are a bunch of other kinds of properties. I don't think that helps our recursiveness. But it would theoretically, and it wouldn't, I don't think it would even help us for the forms because, for example, if you have X and Y, right? And then you have a list of enum properties. Then you have, I guess, two fields. I guess that would work. Yeah, I mean, like, you're doing the exact same thing I'm doing, so I can't. Definitely not mad at you for trying. Appreciate the suggestions. If you have an enum property, and theoretically, which again, like this example doesn't show what component types array is, right? It's just some random, like undefined variable. But I have set up an enum property before we have one of those, right? So I know that this is a component list that you need to append like a key. What was it? Like a key, a value, and a description or something like that. There's a couple of different things that you can pass into that. I guess you still need the pointer property to be able to build the UI, which I don't think you can do there. Yeah, doing it the way you originally tried resulted in property component properties being inaccessible to layout prop. Yeah. It's a separate issue. Looks like you have to use mixin classes for property group inheritance. Adding an instance of every type to the component list with a boolean with a boolean to indicate whether it's actually enabled or not. That doesn't help us. God, I wish my neighbors would stop smoking. Let's see. 10 o'clock. See, the module defines properties to extend Blender's internal data. Okay. So what are we down to? Are we down to we can only do simple properties? Is that what we're going to say here? I think that if we flatten, right, and we create flat property groups, we can end up with almost anything except rich lists. I think if we flatten and we use like weird dot key names, so like player dot or like member dot player, for example, and then player would have name and team, so you would end up with like member dot player dot name, member dot player dot team, and those would both be top level keys as strings. And then those could be primitives, so those could be enums or floats or bools or whatever, but it wouldn't be if you have a list of a struct type. I don't know that it would work. But it would work for pretty much everything else. Because if you have a list of a struct type, then you need to have like an enum property for a list and then like a second form for that list. But the form needs to be flattened into the UI. It's like people really rag on JavaScript and like, you know, front end frameworks and React and all that stuff. But this would have been done a week and a half ago if I was using any of them. Can you do custom UI? Maybe that's our savior. Can we do like I don't love this option, but like here's Dear Mgui. They're binding to OpenGL. Do we compile a Bevy application that we then run inside of Blender via Rust that then touches the OpenGL bindings as a shader and then renders everything? I feel like we're having enough trouble trying to use the Blender UI that something like this would be potentially a route. This is obviously like not touched for 2 years, I guess. I don't know if this is even maintained. But it does prove that it's possible. I wanted it to be directly integrated, but not having a single struct level feels restrictive. But at the same time, yeah, because I think if I'm thinking about this, right? If you set a transform, you need like, I guess you need the transform component. That component has 3 fields in it: rotation, scale, and translation. TRS, right? You would end up wanting like vec3, whatever for the UI, which would be, I think, fine, actually. What is there in, let's look at the avian stuff. It feels restrictive to do it like this. But Collider Constructor is one of the more complicated things that I can think of. So this is a struct in a enum. And then this is the problem, I think. Right? So you end up with this thing, which has a struct in an enum variant, which has a struct inside of it, which is an enum inside of it. So you end up with, what's the list here? List here is enum, struct options, enum in those struct options fields. Enum, struct options, enum fields. Yeah. Which I feel like we need the recursive UI. I feel like I need to check to see what Bevy supports at this point. Because if we align with Bevy, then that will work for the general population of people looking for stuff like this. And if you wanted Bevy's features, you could go from like a minimal version of this to Bevy, for example. So if we look at the UI, also the other thing is that Bevy uses, I think, a completely different representation of the type registry, which feels weird. But they've got this draw property group function, right? property group, layout, level of nesting. And I actually think level of nesting is that flattening we were talking about. So it draws recursively, whereas draw property group used, not in this file. There's draw property group. That's used in draw component UI, which is clearly in like a panel draw of some kind. Yada, yada, yada. Draw property group, root name, etc. And then they do some get atters on that property group. This comment is hilarious now that I know more about it. Item in our components hierarchy, get the correct property group by strings because, of course, we cannot pass objects to operators. That's true. You can't pass anything to operators. Well, technically, you can pass fields to operators, but it's like a whole thing. So they're checking for enum variants there. If is enum, then get a row. Display struct or nothing. Separator selection for property group. So this is the selection for the enum stored, I guess, on the property group itself. Which theoretically could be anywhere. And then for field name in all the field names. Show a display name. If nested, draw more in a column orientation. But do they ever call .prop in here? No, they're rendering operators. They're rendering operators? No, there's a .prop. I think my version of Blender is too far for Blenby. I'm on 4.3. 4. What? 4.2. 4.2 I think is compatible. So I think I already have it installed. We can go back to, oh dang, which one is the development plugin and which one is the one that is actually released? This one's the local one. This one's the released one. I think I'll go with the local one, assuming that it's more up to date. And then what was the name of the project that I was using with Blenby? What were we doing? The washing machine game, right? Where did I put that? What did I call it? This would have been Bevy Jam 5. I think I put it in the Rust Adventure repos. Cycle, yeah. I think we called it Wash Cycle, right? Because of the theme of the jam. So this is our previous Blenvy project. You can see we've got some like helpers and stuff in here. There should be this file. Which like clearly has changed a little bit since we wanted to use it, right? Is component, is resource. Those are now, what is it called? Reflect types or something like that. So we should be able to grab this JSON file and take a look. I haven't run this project in a while, so I don't know. Exactly what that's going to turn into. Let's quit that, reopen it just for cleanliness. And then there's going to be a file in here. This is the other thing that Blenvy does that we don't do in ours. It renders out sort of like scenes to different GLTF files for you. If you wanted to do scenes to different GLTF files, you totally could with ours, but you have to choose to do it. Right? Like, however you can export GLTF from Blender will just work, which I like a lot. This is not the blend file. Where's the blend file? This is blueprints, meta, baked stuff. Baked blueprints. Sorry, where the hell did I put the Blender file? Audio, blueprints, GLB, 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 RON, WGSL, GLB, 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 GLB. F1. Do you not use Command P? Or Command Shift P? It is in the art directory. Absolutely. Why did I think that was open before? You use F1 instead of like Control P or Control Shift P, Hukasu? Is F1 on the top row of your keyboard? Like, do you have like a physical F1 key? Okay, all of this stuff. I did a great job of naming my Blender files. Test scenes, another test scenes copy. Oh, it was just going to be in the sidebar here too. Okay, which one is later? I'm going to go with 9/28/24 or 7/22. 9/28. Oh, that's Blender. Shoot. That was my fault. Hopefully it doesn't close the app. Okay, so we've got a bunch of stuff in here. The thing that I really want to look at is the UI for Blenvy, if it will open. Here's Blenvy. Here's component. So do we have any... Okay, here's component. It puts everything in a separate box, which I think is maybe a bunch of operators. Yeah. So these are operator buttons. This is components meta.components 2. So it's a list of some kind. Are they doing an enum list for everything? Huh. Let me screenshot that. Save that for later. So this is the cuboid, right? So if we do collider constructor, because that was the one I was looking at, add, we use, I guess this is an enum for everything inside of that. What was the one that was very complicated? It doesn't look like it's in here. So it either didn't exist in this version of Avian or height field list scale. And NeoVim with telescope, this would be leader FF, yeah. So I guess they are dynamically constructing fields for operators. Interesting. There's got to be some logs here, right? BPy app timers callback watch schema did not return none or float. Yada yada yada. None of that matters for us. I am interested in no logs here. Nothing there. Sphere. I'm looking for something with an additional. This is like capsule endpoints A, B, and radius. A and B are vec3s, so that doesn't help. Polyline has indices, which is sum, and then, okay, so this is the way that more complicated UI works in BlendV, right? So this can be sum or none. So there's collider constructor polyline, which has indices as a field, which can be an option of something. Option is an enum. We hit sum. Sum can be whatever. Check boxes, I guess. I don't know what indices is. No, polyline would be indices and vertices. Why those would have check boxes, I don't know. Are specifically radio elements, right? Because like, shouldn't these be index numbers? If we're going with vertices and indices, like an index buffer or vertex buffer, this should be like a list of numbers and a list of, so not all of the UI correctly constructs, I guess. I could try to write some of these demo structs and see what it does. But I guess this proves that it's possible overall. So I guess the thing that I want to test then is I had some assumptions about, let's close that out, don't save. I had some assumptions that I've been running with about how we can build UI. And now that I have a little bit of a better understanding of what it means to be building UI, can I convince it to do something manually here? So let's do active editor, right? I think we can actually. So not active editor list, but active, what, context manager, context manager? I'm losing it. Window, I might need another energy drink this morning. Context window manager dot active editor no brackets testing equals 2, right? And then assuming that we are in a state where this works, then we should be able to try to set up some UI for that. I'm currently running under the assumption that we need properties. But is that actually true? Or do we just need ID values? That's really the question. If that answer is that we can actually build UI for ID properties, which isn't in the docs anywhere, I think that opens up some stuff for us. Right, so I guess I need anything here, right? Team member is fine. I guess player still has an issue, but I can get rid of that. That's just some logging stuff. So let's get rid of this for the moment so that we don't even try to recurse currently. And then we were able to set this property. So the question is, if we try to .prop it, what happens? Components, where's our draw function? Here's our draw function for our panel. Layout box. Scheme build UI for the editor. And then after the editor gets built, this would be layout.prop menu operator panel layout UI layout and then .prop in general, which of course isn't going to be here, is it? There's .prop. So .prop data any type. This any type is also confusing because it's RNA type used for pointers to any possible data. Base class BPY struct, which tells me that it doesn't need to be a property. But we need data and property. So we need context.window manager .active editor. And we need testing. And theoretically, if that works, then we have opened up a significant set of possibilities for building UI. Or if we can open it up. That's the other thing. So, property not found, component test team member .testing. I feel like this is something that I've run into in the past. Then this is why I think that we can't use it. But I think one thing we should do, context.window manager.active editor testing. I think we should print that value. We have access to the value there. So really the question is there like a .id prop or something? Prop menu enum. Prop with popover. So these props are all for props, right? And then operator is a button. You're pretty sure the UI stuff needs to be RNA properties? Yeah, so that's the tough part here. We need to shove everything into RNA properties. But RNA properties don't let us do nested structures. So we kind of need to give everything an ID and then reassociate everything with those IDs so that we can render them all, right? Like we have all the property groups and stuff. So what we would actually need to do is on Window Manager set a bunch of fields that were each their own property group. Menu contents, popover, separator, progress. It's also template ID. What is template ID? Choose from a list of existing instances of a property group stored in collection properties. Create new instances, possibly delete instances, yada yada. UI list, draw buttons, row, group operator. You can set properties on an operator. You can set random stuff like this. I don't know if you can define it at runtime. Presumably you can. I like how this isn't even an ad. It's just watch a video. Yeah, okay. So draw, prop, template ID, object, active material, New. Don't think that's what we want. Don't know. Hard to tell. Create a new ID block. Would be nice if any of these had like photos or descriptions of what they actually showed like in the UI. Template any ID. Action search preview. Path builder. Histogram, colors. Not sure if it helps, but RNA properties have update, get, set, callable parameters, and those copy the value to from somewhere else. To from somewhere else. Yeah, I think that gets at the core of what we need to actually start doing. For every substruct, then we need to have a key in that we can look up. Which starts to get kind of annoying. Those are all template functions. Let's see, Blender, render ID prop. That's not what I'm talking about. That's a like an ID pass for meshes. Render operators. Wow, that is not the same site at all. Oh, they mean like literal render, like cycles render. Try grepping the BL UI code to see if it's been used. Okay. Let's set the ID type of the object before selecting an object of that ID type. So that is like type-based filtering on an object that you can select from the UI. That's not what we want. This person's using an int property. So, feels like it should work. Prop, active data, arm, slider, shows nothing, yada yada. Swap the single and double quotes and it works. Oh. Okay. That's not encouraging. Double quotes for strings, single quotes for enum IDs. Cool. Text, object.name. So we can just throw stuff in here as labels. That is something we can do. Which makes me feel like there should be a way to set up a form element. Right? Because like this, for example, active object is whatever, right? The thing that we can do here, dot label text equals, right? Label text equals like this. The number is whatever. And this works. As soon as I get around to installing it, building it, closing Blender, reopening Blender. Waiting for Blender to finish opening. Team member, insert. Can only concatenate string, not int. Okay, fine. I lose because this is an int. How do I stringify an int? str. Cool. Thanks, Lo. Is my my lack of Python experience showing? It's fine. I've never pretended to be a Python expert anyway. Team member, insert, and then the number is 2. So we can get a number into the UI. That is possible. We have the values. We can render them in the UI. The thing that is not findable in the docs for me is right, like all of these props need to be a property name on some object. I don't understand why. I don't understand why it can't just like store it somewhere for me. As a label only for editable stuff, it needs to be RNA properties. Right. So I think we are left with flattening. Right? I think that we have to flatten. The only other thing that I can think of, right? Layout.prop, context.window manager, active editor, testing, right? So like, if this could be a prop, then we could render it. The Active editor is set here. And here, if we set some arbitrary, where did we put set testing? Testing equals 2. Perfect. Let's do testing equals int or bpi.props.int property, right? Default to. Is that all we need? Yeah, no, I think we already just saw the issue. It showed up in the console there. So like, insert property not found dot testing, right? Because invalid ID property type property deferred not supported. So how do I set that? Right? Like, if you want me to use RNA properties, right, I have to be able to set RNA properties somewhere. And apparently I can't set RNA properties here. So the only place to set RNA properties is on the window. Right? So can we do that dynamically? Can I do that like this? I don't think so. Did we test that earlier? I forget. Right, window manager testing. I think the really frustrating part in that sense is like all of this could be documented, right? All of the like, hey, you can't do this. Hey, this is supposed to work like that. Hey, these functions are available there. Hey, IDs and RNA properties are different. Hey, if you want to render anything, you have to do it this way. All of that stuff could be documented, and it doesn't feel like it is. You think property needs to be added on the type and not on the instance? Okay. Yeah, you're right. That's the other thing. You know anything about progress on the Bevy editor? You don't follow the project. The Bevy editor is currently, there's two things that I would say about the Bevy editor. One is that there are people who are actually experimenting with, panel layouts and like the things you would like consider an editor. That's all in like the prototype stage. And the other thing is the biggest thing that we kind of really need for the editor to be effectful, like useful, is BSN, which is the new Bevy scene notation. And there's been a lot of progress towards BSN in this cycle, but we don't have BSN yet. So there's been a lot of PRs, such as, what is it? Spawning. I forget what this was titled. Let's look for closed PRs. It was closed like fairly recently. Improved entity mapping and cloning, improved scene spawning and bundle effects. There's a couple things before that too. This work going in is huge. So I don't know how familiar you happen to be with Bevy specifically, but if you look at, this is the kind of like old way of spawning hierarchies. So command spawn and then with children, or like you do whatever up here, you get the entity ID and then like with children and then spawn and with children. The new way is this. So now we can spawn hierarchies and arbitrary relationships, actually, which also made it in this way. There's some demo work for reactivity that's going on as well. The next step on top of this is, I think, constructs. And then on top of that stuff is like BSN, which is like the new scene notation and stuff. So there's a lot of work going on towards editor stuff. It may not be particularly obvious how this connects to the editor, but this pushes us towards BSN. BSN is going to be the format for the editor so that you can serialize and deserialize like scene files out, which is why it's so important. So progress is being made, basically. But there's nothing you can like install and try yet. Okay, what was I gonna do? Set it on the type. Set it on the type. Set it on the type. Registry, component data, type path structs, window manager. This is bpi.types.window manager. Theoretically like this, because we need to do it dynamically at some point, right? The one thing we can do is we can set ID properties, so the ones that can't be used for UI. We can set ID properties, and that can be a list of all of these keys in order. And then we can just put these keys on the window manager and iterate over the keys in the other list, look for those keys on the window manager, build the UI from there. Just kind of a pain. I also don't know if that syntax is going to work. That's another thing. Like the I don't know if this is going to work until I run it is a thing that I've totally gotten used to being able to know if my code is going to run before I run it. For the vast majority of things. And needing to constantly set this up just reminds me of how nice that is. Set adder. Welcome to Python. Yeah, exactly. You think this is set adder? That sounds right to me. We do need it to be like a set adder and not a, how do I frame it? And not a static access. I'm probably closing Blender more than I need to, strictly speaking, but oh, I think it didn't. I think it broke. I think I missed a parenthesis. $170. I guess this is a 3 tuple setting, set adder. Yeah, you already said it in chat. Okay, cool. Cool. Cool, and it broke last time, so it should already just be ready to go for us since it wasn't running. Insert. And then here's testing with a 2. So we can just set arbitrary fields here. I think we can set arbitrary property groups. What we can't do is nest anything. So what we end up with then is kind of this chain of IDs, right? Similar to the way that Blenvy had their recursive stuff going. We end up setting these keys based on that nested chain, even though they're all flat. So I think team member then what do we need? We would need, I'm trying to think about the kind of structure that I want to put here. Now let me check this message first. If you ever send me a message, don't delete the message before I've seen it. So we need to track, I guess, the keys and levels of nesting. So the question is, where do we want to store that? For now, I think we can just store it randomly here. But in the longer term, we do need to do that in some way. That brings us all the way back to what I said at the beginning of the stream. If we are actually going to do this, then where is that? Something like this might be a good idea. Because what this will let us do is build up the editors in a single table column-like structure. I don't know if this specific function would work for us because it's very much like, I don't know what it does to nested lists, right? Like name, summit, population, 1, 2, 3, 4. So like that goes here, which means that there's 2 entries for this, which isn't really what we want. We want slightly different behavior. I don't know if you can configure this to do that behavior. So like nested lists become a little bit awkward. The good thing is I think we can pre-process everything to iron all of that out. So we end up with some kind of structure that has a list of keys. Why no nesting? You think it's possible? What's the limitation? We can't set it. I can't figure out how to set. That's what this whole thing is. This whole thing we've been doing with the active editor, and then in like an attribute here, right? This player doesn't exist. So we've got. Let me explain this, so that if anybody can point out the flaw, then we don't have to do the other stuff. So we've got bpy.types.windowmanager.activeEditor, right? This is where the editor for the root struct type happens. Like this is the team manager struct, right? There's a property group. So pointer property to the team manager property group that we've constructed. This is supposed to have a player, which points to another property group, and a team, which is an enum. So the team works because it's the top level, right? The thing that doesn't work is that player doesn't exist here. The player doesn't exist for some reason. I don't know why player doesn't exist there. Holding that aside for a second, if we try to set player, this never works. For whatever reason, we can never get this to be, maybe set adder is what we're supposed to be doing here. Now that I think about it, now that we've used that. Get rid of those for a second. So this would be field type path. So active editor key pointer property to field type path should give us that secondary level. And if we set everything up here, and we fetch the type registry, really nice to be able to do that from that quick menu, by the way. And we insert here. Oh man, is that going to have worked? I simultaneously want that to have worked and not want that to have worked. I'm both. I am living in both worlds at the moment. Here's draw. And then build UI has a recursive build UI has a recursion in it. It's popped out to render props at the moment. So this, currently not able to recurse, would turn into this, which should render that for us. So let's build this, assuming that that old code is actually doing the right thing. Okay, X, don't save, Blender, type registry, team member, insert, and then yes, we get component tests team member has no attribute player. So assuming that all ran through, right? There's testing. This is setting the key, is class and value, right? So is class and value, and then we get to team. So we've hit player, component fields, player. We're processing player. This is the registry JSON information for the root struct. This is the field that we need to set here. It is a class. It is a component test player. So we have the right class. And then we've set that adder. Context, window manager, active editor to the player key with the pointer property. Line 204 is incorrect. It sets a property and instance, not a type. So you're saying that we need window manager, active editor, key. I hope you're right. Okay. class, component test player, trace back, property deferred object has no attribute player. Probably needs to be done before active editor is added to the window manager. Interesting. Okay, so okay. So that means I need to set adder on the active editor type, which is the property group, which would be done way earlier. Is that what you're saying? Right, because this is a pointer property to a property group. And then you're saying that we need to do this to this. So like set it on form, which is a pointer property, or do we need to set it on the property group itself? If it is a property group, no need for set adder. Okay. It's a property group, no need for set adder. I feel like we're back where we were. Okay, so right, we've got active editor, which is a pointer property to the team member, right? Let me write this down just for chat purposes. This is pointer property type equals team member. That's what this is, right? Here we set something on the window manager. That's fine. We're ignoring that. This doesn't have player set, even though it has it in the property group, right? So this property group here has player and it has team. Team is fine because it's an enum. Player is not even here because it's a property group, or it's a class, right? That inherits from a property group and whatnot. Let me just check that just for sanity's sake. Yeah, so we've got component data, which inherits from property group. The larger type, the dynamic type that we construct, is base classed from component data. So we've got effectively the class below this has type path name and then team and player. That's what this is. This has team and player and name and type path. So eventually we get down into the annotations and we say, hey, we have the player key here. Because that key doesn't exist when we do the pointer property for the property group, I'm trying to set it to something. It can be added into the group property used by the pointer property, but this might be the limitation making the nesting not possible. This is one of the walls that I've been running into. Basically, the idea being that, can I log this out somewhere? It would be nice. I don't think I can. I think this is the representation of what it is, but Ugh. It's Python and it's not. Ugh, that's so annoying. Okay. Anyway, let me select all these and hit enter. Okay, so this is like a Pythonized version of the data that we have, right? Whatever, I don't care. So this is the JSON that we get. This is what I turn into the property group. So we end up with why is that like that? Oh no, that's like that because I misformatted it. Okay. This is it. We end up with this team member struct or property group, right? This property group ends up with team that gets defined as an enum and player that gets defined as another property group class. For some reason, team is available and player is not, even though they basically get set the same way. So when we go here, that's what I mean by this team member. This team member has player, which is a property group, and team. If I were to print this, which I probably should do, actually, we print component fields already, right? Right, component fields here, we have player defined. And then there's a team here, but we have an error. So that's the issue. Like we have player here. Player is a component test player class, which is the subgroup of component data, which is a property group that doesn't get initialized for whatever reason. That's why. So we've got like team member, player prop group, right? This is a prop group. Pseudo syntax, obviously. This is what we have. This is what's getting set here in this pointer property, and this value never gets initialized. Right? It exists in the annotations. It doesn't exist in the instance, as far as I can tell. That's what's preventing us from doing this recursively. Is the class registered? Yes, all classes should be registered. So if this one is registered, then the others should be too. Let me make sure. So this is new property. Let's say print registering print new property. I guess we only register outside of the function. So actually, you might be right. We might have missed this. So let's keep that log there. And then this does an early return if we've already constructed. So actually, I think you might be right. I think we have to do this for this. We don't need to do the check here because we already know that we are registering a new class by virtue of having made it here. So then this doesn't need to be here. And this should be registering everything now. It would... I would be very happy if that was just the issue. If the issue was just literally didn't register it, therefore it didn't work. That would be really unfortunate. It's like one of those Python style errors, I guess. Oh, okay, I made a mistake. Okay, what's the mistake? Preferences. Okay. Line 168. 1680. 168. Right, I left my little pseudocode thing in here. Okay. Drag this over. Run it. And then this should have registered everything. So make property component tests player. This means we're actually doing the work here. Make property string just returns string. Make property task priority. That's another thing that's irrelevant for us. Team member has player in it. We've already constructed player because we did it up here. So it should already be registered. So team member, insert. And a bunch of stuff breaks because my code assumes that we're in the other state of things. So is class player. Object has no attribute player. On property deferred. Let's get rid of this extra set, I guess, for the moment. And just see what happens. Fetch the registry. Team member, inserts. And then when we go to do the UI, it can't find player still. Component test team member, right? This is the thing that has player on it. Has no attribute player. And that's all the way down here in render props, if I remember correctly. Right? So if we try to create a box here and we get adder for that key, right? I can print here. Context, print, context key, just to, you know, show off and be sure. Print, context. Just build preferences, drag the zip in, drop it, bring it back up. Fetch team member, insert. Object has no attribute player. is class on the window manager active editor. So if we get the active editor, right? Here's active editor. We pass in that key. Let's see, 454, 724, 726, layout.prop, context key. So we end up getting down to print layout.prop, context key. Kill, up, Blender, load, done, fetch, team member, insert, no attribute player, and we end up with is class active editor. That doesn't seem right. Unless I didn't save that file. This looks like it's not even getting far enough. So it starts with the active editor and then recurses down. So this inspect is class should hit for active editor first. And then what is this actually failing on? Layout.prop on 26. Which should have printed these and didn't. Right? Should have printed these. No, this 726. Put them in the wrong spot. Let's print key here too then. Build. Bob the Builder over here. Blender. Load. Make it bigger for chat. Drag open these windows. Insert. And we end up with is class, window manager, context, active editor, layout.prop, component test team member is the context, player is the key, and name on player is what we actually need to get the prop for, right? So prop on player, key is name. I guess since we only have, like, this is the only one that gets here, I think. Maybe not. I think it is the only one that gets here because I think the other one runs this. So on component test team member, which should have player, we're looking for the name on the player. And this component test team member object has no attribute player. I guess is player not an attribute? Is it a key? So annoying. Let's do this. Let's do if key is name. Drop this. Otherwise, let the code run. Right? And now we know we have active editor, player, and name. So like theoretically this. Don't save, open Blender. Type registry. I think the worst part is that we're so close. Like, key player not found. So like, this is never there. Player is never there. Let's make sure that we registered it one more time. Right. Here's where we register. Let's do a print registering print this. Right. Registering type path. And then show us the registration or like the class that we're registering. Drop this in. Do our little dance again. Type registry. Team member. Insert. Player not found. So we did the whole workflow. Registering component test player. So player is definitely registered. Right? And that is definitely the class. And then team member also registered. So that's it. It's definitely registered. Player just doesn't exist on it. That's why we can't do the recursion. Because we can't figure out how to get that value to be there. Right? It's like the key is missing. It's in the annotations, but it's like the key is missing in the instance, and I don't know why. It's registered. Yeah. And then, so because it's not there for whatever reason, we also can't set it. Right? That's what this is trying to do. This is trying to set the player key to a pointer property that will work. So player pointer property to that field path. And this should also fail. And I think this one fails because we can't set that value. Although at this point, So team member, if I can spell correctly. So we end up with insert components, active editor, and then yeah, property deferred has no attribute player. So weird. What is the cause of this? Not a typo, I suppose, but what is the only thing you can think about? So like you think I typoed player? I guess that would be the only thing, right? Player Paul. I can't find any misspellings. It also is like it's in the annotations, right? So if it's in the annotations, it should be there for the value, but it is not. So property deferred object has no attribute player, which, you know, is fine, right? Like it doesn't particularly matter that active editor has player specifically, or like in the way that we originally set it up, because we can set it. Theoretically, we could set it, and then recurse down into it, right? But it doesn't seem like we can even set this. So like bpy types window manager active editor doesn't let us set a key. So this doesn't work, right? This set adder. So we would need context dot window manager dot editor active editor, right? Key equals this. But this doesn't work because why didn't this work? I forget why this didn't work, but I don't think this works either. Because we can't use a pointer property in an ID property set. And this is key as an ID property, right? So I think that for whatever reason, Blender just doesn't work with nested property groups, right? Couple of potential collection property inside a property group, object pointer, whatever, collection property, object pointer, register pointer, register list, collection property, list item. They're setting my list on the scene type. They're setting the collection property to a list item, and the list item has a string property and an object group, which is a collection property. So this is a collection of a collection. But there's only one property group here, technically. I guess object pointer is also a property group, right? But it's got a level of indirection because of this collection property. And they're not doing UI. Nested property groups do work in Blender, at least in the usual way. In this generic runtime way to add properties, maybe not. Okay, so nested property groups work in Blender? To render UI specifically? Maybe I hard code one then, if that's the case. List of lists. So you think that if I do some random property here, let's go here. Let's say we're going to take this, I'm going to turn this into test wrapper component data, right? That has a name and whatever. And this has, I guess we can use value being like test inner component data, which has a name and like, I don't know, bpi.props.float property, right? FLT. So this is the inner and this is the outer, and I should be able to do this. I guess I need a pointer property here. Okay, you found an old closed source one that works. Okay, so do I need the pointer property here, I guess is my question. 154. Does that need to be pointer property? If that's the case, then I can just muck with my type construction and see if I can get it to work at some point. But knowing that that works is a huge first step. Oh, you can't see the screen, but yes. Did I put my head there? I moved my head. This line. That should be over my head. But yes, it needs to be a pointer property, so it needs to be a bpi.props. I think this is it. So theoretically, this should let us go down into FLT and stuff. So let's try it. I'm just going to hard code it. And it's 11:30. That'll be the final test probably that we do on stream right now. Let's comment this stuff out. We're not going to deal with that right now. Let's do bpi.types.windowmanager dot test nested. If test inner component data is itself a property group. Yeah, they should be test inner component data, parentheses bpi.types.property group. Test wrapper component data, same thing, bpi types property group. So they both, as far as I understand the syntax, subclass property group, which should be enough. So if we set on the window manager test nested to test wrapper component data, which probably needs to be its own bpi.props.pointer property type equals this. So test nested, right? I'm just double checking pointer property to inner. So we should be able to go down to our draw. Let's scroll all the way around everywhere. Go down to our draw. And maybe I do this before the build UI stuff, just so that it always runs. And then we get context.window.manager.test nested. And this is what, let's do box just to box this up in its own thing. And then this is box.prop, test nested. Let's do type path. And then box.prop, context.window manager, test nested, dot value dot FLT. So this should be the inner or the outer followed by the inner prop. If I've done it correctly. always room for me not having done it correctly. Okay, Blender, open. And then if this works, which it doesn't look like it does, window manager object has no attribute test nested. Context window manager test nested. Did I do this incorrectly? Does this need to be an attribute? Or a square brackety thing? I set it up here on bpi.types of window manager test nested. Same thing I'm doing for active editor. Pointer property, type, same thing. So the fields that are pointer property fields are not accessible. Or the values aren't set. Is that possible? No. Default unknown. Name type path. Okay, so test wrapper component data. Right? Type path. Type path should be there. Right? Test nested. That is where I'm setting this pointer property and where we're trying to access it from. And it says that window manager has no attribute test nested on 467 in draw. So why wouldn't the window manager have that field? Are those registered too? No, of course not. Why would I remember how to register anything? Register class bpi utils. Of course I didn't register them. Why would I register them? We can register them anywhere. And I do know that. It wouldn't be that amazing to do it every time we called this. We don't really need to, but test inner. I guess I'll do the inner before the outer. Inner before the one that uses it. Build preferences. Don't save. Blender. I think I also changed something in the access code, so we might need to do this again, but insert. Key not found is, I think, my issue because I changed that to a key instead of an attribute. So we'll go change that back. right? So dot test nested. That works. It's rendering. Okay. So we've proven that that works, which to me says that there is an issue in the way that I'm constructing the type or registering it or something like that. That is really good to know. Thank you for the confirmation that that works, Xavier. That is super useful. It is unfortunately there's more to be done. But knowing that that works means that I can continue working on trying to get it to work. From here, I'll take those types and I will dynamically construct them in the way that I am dynamically constructing and slowly narrow it down to where the issue is. So that's super useful. Thank you. With that, though, I think that's going to be the stream for today. I'll probably keep doing the midweek streams. So maybe Monday, depending. Yeah. Do y'all have preference for midweek streams? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like that kind of thing? In any case, I will see you early next week. Thanks for hanging out through the Blender trials and tribulations. Have a good weekend, y'all.